Mendelian genetics. Genetics is the study of how parents pass their traits, characteristics, or even their DNA from one generation to another. In order to understand genetics, we first have to look at DNA. DNA has a lot of components. These components are called genes. Genes are segments or pieces of DNA that code for a trait. So they could code for eye color, they could code for height, they could code for pigmentation, skin tone, whether you're susceptible to diabetes, how healthy you will be. It could basically code for anything. However, in genetics, we do have specific version of genes, and these versions are called alleles. And to help you understand the difference between genes and alleles, I came up with an analogy or a series of analogies. For example, we need to also understand that each allele comes from each parent, one from each parent to be precise. So, for example, shoe is very generic. It's very broad, right? If we have a gene for shoe, then the alleles will be Nike and Vans because they're types of shoes. They're versions of a shoe. Soda, for example, would be classified as a gene in my analogy, and the alleles would be Pepsi and Sprite. They're versions of soda. So more realistically, eye color in humans, right, would be gene, and our alleles could be brown or blue. Another gene could code for height, and two versions of height could be tall or short, or even average. So what I want you to do is pause this podcast, and I want you to come up with more examples using the blank spaces provided in the table that you have on your notes. Go ahead and pause, take your time, and then press play again. Okay, so now that you tried doing that, I also want to say that we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. 23, so 46 total. One comes from mom and the other comes from dad. And if we look at the chromosomes that are very similar and of the same or very, very similar height, we could find the same genes present. So the gene for eye color should be present in a similar location here and here as well. However, the alleles might be different. So this gene might code for brown eyes, and this gene might code for blue eyes. And then this gene down here might code for short, and this gene right here might code for tall. Okay, so the alleles might be a little different, but the genes are pretty much the same. And we call these pairs of chromosomes, we call them homologous chromosomes. Okay, and we call it this particular one, I just made it up. We call it homologous chromosome number 8 because it's one of the 23 pairs. Okay, autosomal just means that they're body cells. They're not cells that you find in the egg or sperm. So these are normal body cells. So that's what autosomal means. Okay. Here I have I also, before I move on to the next slide, I need you guys to understand that this idea, okay, that the 23rd chromosome, the 23rd chromosomal pair is going to represent our sex chromosomes. So if you have an X and a Y, so a small a big and a small chromosome, then that's going to represent a male. And if you have two chromosomes that are of similar height, not necessarily tiny, then that's going to represent a female. So with that information, I want you guys to try this question right here, okay? The SRY gene controls testicular development and is only found in males. Which chromosome is it most likely to be found in? So go ahead and take your time, dissect the question, try to figure out which ones are wrong and which ones are right. Okay, so now that you tried, here is the answer. Okay, the answer is that it's found on the Y sex chromosome. And let's take a look at this question. It says the SRY gene, so there's a gene and it codes for a particular trait, which is testicular development. And we know that testicles are only found in males. So that is our key information here. Which chromosome is this gene most likely found on? So we know that males have the XY sex chromosomes, okay? If it were found in the X, then there might be a possibility where the female might have this, trait. And we know that doesn't happen with females. So it can't be X. It can't be found on an X. And because testicular has to do with the sex of an individual, it cannot be chromosome 8. And it cannot be one of the first 22 chromosomes. Okay? It has to be one of the sex chromosomes. And that is why C and D is going to be one of those. And so because it's only found in males and males only have the Y, right? And females don't have that, then that's why the answer is going to be D. This gene is found in the Y sex chromosome since females don't have a Y and only males do, so that makes sense. Okay, so that was meant to be a tough question, a critical thinking question. And if I wanted to go further, I'd ask you to justify your reasoning under this question. Now, there are two words you have to remember. One of them is called genotype. Genotype. It starts with the letter G. Just think of genes, okay? We represent genes as letters. We talked about this. There are two alleles typically for every gene. So we represent these genotypes by letters. For example, big T might represent tall. Little t might represent short. Okay, big R might represent, it might represent your eye color, might represent brown. Little r might represent blue eye color. So we represent the genotype as letters. The phenotype, which is what it actually represents, is gonna be tall, short, round, squared, colorblind, not colorblind. So to help you guys out, I put this here. Phenotype is the physical features. Genotype is talking about the genes in the form of letters. Okay, so keep that in mind. You also have to know this. Let's say a boy inherits an allele for brown eyes and another for blue eyes. What will his eye color be? So, some alleles are dominant. Okay, some alleles are dominant, and meaning that they block the expression of another allele. So, for example, if brown is dominant over blue, as long as we have a brown allele, this boy is going to only have brown eyes. So not blue eyes and not a combination of both. It's just going to have brown. Okay? So some alleles are dominant and they're going to block the expression of another allele. Dominant alleles are capitalized. The allele that is not dominant is called recessive. So you need to know the difference between the two. And this is represented by a lowercase letter. So here, for example, brown is dominant, so it's going to be capitalized. Blue eyes is recessive, meaning that it's going to be blocked or masked, and we are going to put a lowercase letter instead. This kid, even though he has the blue eye allele from dad, this kid is not going to have blue eyes. He's going to have brown eyes because mom's allele is dominant in this situation. Okay, there's one more set of vocab words that you need to know. These are the last two. Homozygous and heterozygous. So the word homo means same. So genotype, any genotype with the two same alleles, the same alleles. So two of them are capitalized or two of them are lowercase. We call that homozygous. If they're different, one big and one small, we call that heterozygous. So here's an example. Let's say we have a gene and it represents eye color. And then we have our alleles right here. The dominant one is brown. The recessive one is gonna be blue eyes. So if we have the genotype of capital B, then that means they're the same. So it's gonna be homozygous. And because they're capitalized, it's gonna be homozygous dominant. What does that represent? We look at the capitalized letter. Whatever that letter represents, that is the phenotype that the child is going to express. So in this case, it's going to be brown eye color. Okay, so this kid, if this kid has this genotype, he's going to have brown eyes. But what if a kid has big B and little b? Then we call that heterozygous. And it's still dominant because we have a capitalized letter there. And we're going to only look at the capital one because that one is going to block the expression of this little guy right here. So we're only looking at the capital letter, and that represents brown eyes. So that is why this child, if this child has big B, little b gene, then it's going to represent brown. But what if we have two little b's? What if the kid inherits two genes with blue eye phenotypes? Then we call this homozygous still because it's the same. They're both the same. They're lowercase, right? And recessive because it's lowercase. And there's no big B, so there's not going to be any brown at all. It's only going to be blue. There's no dominant allele here. So this child is going to have blue eye color. Okay, so this basically summarizes everything that we learned. If you understand this, then you're pretty much set to answer the questions that I'm asking of you to do. So you have, I believe, 4 sets of questions. I'm gonna do the first one of each set so that you guys know what you're supposed to be doing. So here I give you letters, I give you the genotypes, and I ask if it's homozygous or heterozygous. Okay, and basically, if they're the same, capitalized or both lowercase, it's homozygous. If one is big, one is small, it's heterozygous, right? In the second one, I'm asking if it's a genotype or a phenotype. So a genotype is talking about the genes, which are the letters. So capital A, little a would be genotype. And then the phenotype would be a physical appearance. So eye color is a physical appearance. So you'd put phenotype there. The third one is asking if it's homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, or heterozygous. So both here are the same, so it's going to be homozygous. But is it homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive? So because they're both capitalized, it's going to be dominant. Okay. And for this one, they're different, right? So it's going to be heterozygous. you could just leave it as heterozygous.